Ready to rent with the peace of mind in Florida? Whether you're a landlord or a tenant, understanding the complex world of rental laws and rights can be overwhelming. But don't worry, I'm here to break it down. In this video, I'll uncover the latest updates for a smooth rental experience in the Sunshine State. What is a Landlord-Tenant Law? These laws and agreements for landlord-tenants can be seen in the Florida statutes. Check out the link in the description for more information about Florida Landlord-Tenant Act. A written rental agreement is more recommended, since you can have documented proof of everything you and the tenant agreed upon. Regardless of the type of agreement that the landlord and tenant make, both their rights and responsibilities are bound by the Florida Landlord-Tenant Laws. What does a lease agreement in Florida have to include? Lease agreements may differ slightly in some terms, but some details should always be considered at the time of writing the agreement and discussing it with the tenant. Overall, to avoid future issues, a lease agreement in Florida should always have a list of people involved in the lease, a detailed description of the property, its location and appliances, rental conditions, entry conditions and rights, policy for repairs, damages, and modifications to the property, security deposit explanation, and smoking, pet, and other additional policies. The most important thing to include in your agreement is lease dates, fees, late fees, and early termination policies. These are the most common causes of misunderstandings and confusion among tenants and landlords, so it's crucial to explain them thoroughly. Landlord and tenant duties and responsibilities in Florida. The first thing that's important to consider in the rental agreement is both the landlord and tenant responsibilities and duties. The landlord usually decides these terms according to their personal requirements and state laws. However, they can also be discussing with the tenant to come to an agreement before signing. Here's an overview of the landlord-tenant responsibilities in the rental agreement. Landlord responsibilities. According to Florida statutes, the landlord may have different duties depending on the type of dwelling unit they're renting. Apartment leases. When it comes to apartment leases, the landlord should ensure that all of these conditions are met. Apartment keys are available, availability of garage disposal bins or facilities, safe conditions in all common areas, complying with applicable building, housing, and health codes according to Florida law. If these codes are not available, then the landlord must provide good plumbing conditions, provision of functioning appliances, requirements for extermination of any wood-destroying organisms, mice, rats, etc. It's important to note that the landlord is not required by Florida law to pay for appliances, but they can do it if they consider it appropriate. Single-family home or duplex leases. In these cases, the landlord shall meet the following requirements. Complying with applicable building, housing, and health codes according to Florida law. If these codes are not available, the landlord must keep the dwelling unit in good condition. Tenant responsibilities. To maintain a proper landlord-tenant relationship, the tenant must do the following things. Pay rent on time, ensure that neither they nor their guests disturb the neighbors in any way, keep the fixtures and appliances in good condition and repair, operate all facilities and appliances reasonably, get rid of any type of trash and waste to keep the rental property clean, comply with Florida building, housing, and health codes if applicable. Rent payments in Florida. To this day, Florida landlord-tenant laws don't require any specific terms regarding payment of the rent or fees. This means that any payment conditions need to be arranged between the landlord and the tenant. The only thing that the Florida landlord-tenant laws say regarding payments is that the tenant must pay rent on time according to the rental property agreement. If the landlord fails to comply with the general property repairs, tenant rights allow them to withhold rent. If this happens, tenants must provide a written notice at least 7 days before withholding the payment. If the landlord still doesn't fix the problem in that time period, the tenant has the right to impose a claim. These terms can be found in the defense of action for rent or possession clause in the Florida statutes. Check out the link in the description for more information on this. Nonpayment of rent. If the tenant fails to pay rent, the landlord can give written notice to the tenant asking them to pay or surrender the premises in a specific period. If the tenant fails to pay again, the landlord can look for civil action for possession of the dwelling unit. Grace periods and late fees. There are no grace periods or late fee conditions imposed by Florida landlord-tenant laws. This means that it's up to the landlord to impose these conditions and discuss them with the tenant. Unit repairs in Florida. According to Florida's landlord-tenant laws, the landlord must provide repairs for any damaged appliance or fixture that avoids Florida's warranty of habitability, which explains that landlords must give proper maintenance to the rental unit to keep it in a safe and fair housing conditions. In the case of these repairs, the tenant shall notify the landlord about the issue and give them at least 7 days to fix it. If the property isn't safe for the tenant, the landlord has to provide the necessary help. Otherwise, the tenant may seek legal advice, withhold partial rent, or terminate the lease. Security deposit laws in Florida. A security deposit is one of the most common requirements in all lease agreements. Florida residential landlord-tenant laws explain that the landlord must not use the security deposit funds in any way until these funds are due to them. Landlords have 3 options to store the security deposit funds that they get from the tenant: purchasing a surety bond, placing the money in the interest-bearing account, or placing the money in a non-interest-bearing account. According to Florida landlord-tenant law, there is no limit on the number of money landlord can charge in their security deposits. Landlords are required to return a partial or complete amount of the security deposit within 15 days of the tenant moving out. If the landlord fails to return the security deposit within those 15 days, the tenant can seek legal help. Lease termination and eviction conditions in Florida. A landlord or a tenant may terminate the rental agreement if the lease reaches its end date, the tenant misses rental payments frequently, the tenant doesn't comply with the requirements stated in the agreement, the tenant intentionally damages the landlord's personal property, and the tenant needs to engage in military service. Regardless of the cause, the landlord must give the tenant a notice of eviction. A landlord may draft a different type of notice depending on the reason for eviction. Click the link in the description for your own lease agreement template for Florida and to learn more about the eviction process and laws in Florida. Termination with cause. When the landlord has a cause for terminating the agreement, these are the most common types of notices. 7 days notice to cure. When the tenant breaches the agreement but the issues can be fixed, the landlord can give a 7-day notice to do it. 3 days notice to confirm rent payment. The landlord may give a tenant 3 days to pay rent if they fail to do it in a particular time period. If the tenant still doesn't pay, the landlord may ask them to leave the unit. 7 days notice to quit. In this case, the landlord is giving the tenant 7 days to leave the premises without any chance of fixing the problem. Termination without cause. A landlord may terminate an agreement without cause depending on the type of agreement. Fixed term agreement. The landlord has to wait until the lease ends before terminating it. Monthly payment agreement. The landlord can give the tenant 15 days to leave the unit. And that's a wrap. I hope this video has been a blast and you've learned all the latest and greatest on Florida landlord-tenant laws and rights. Whether you're a landlord or a tenant, understanding the ins and outs of the rental world is very important. Remember, it's still important that you seek legal advice before writing the lease agreements. Go ahead and take this knowledge, keep it in mind, and let's make renting in the Sunshine State a whole lot more fun. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to comment any questions you may have. Also, like and subscribe for more videos like these. Check out these videos.